Howdy, here's my next set of 5 books all over the place. I'm not going to spend too much time on Hellbender by Frank J. Fleming. You may or may not know who Frank J. Fleming is. He's kind of a comic writer. He has the website imao.us. It's been around for a long time. I have one of his old T-shirts from 15 plus years ago, Nuke the Moon. He's a writer for the Babylon Bee, and Hellbender is kind of a sci-fi comedy, into the world, Satan, and all this other stuff. It's obviously intended to kick off a series, and maybe he will continue with the series. I didn't find it interesting enough that if he has another one that comes out, that I'd want to read the next one, but maybe it's more to your taste. That it's a little too overly whimsical for my taste. So my comedy is not quite, the comedy I prefer is not quite of this flavor. And my comic sci-fi, and I love comic sci-fi too, mine is more like Retief and not like Hellbender. If you've not read any of the Retief stories, books, whatever, those are really fun. Anyway, new to me to a certain extent. But of course, just like so many other classic literature, I knew details about it, or at least you know about a guy who gets stranded on a desert isle, and there's some his man Friday, who's a native. But like most people, I wasn't entirely clear where the action supposedly took place. And then, of course, when you get into the actual novel, you don't realize the pacing of the plot is a lot different from what you thought it was going to be, because when miniseries, TV shows, movies have been made, they have to make it a little more interesting, or I should say they should move up the action, and they cut out in certain plots entirely. So you don't realize that Robinson Crusoe had been a slave for a while. And of course, Europeans, especially sailors, getting captured by various pirates from various nations and getting enslaved was not that unusual during Crusoe's time. So this is set in the year 1651. I'm trying to remember Daniel Defoe himself. This book was written. When was it written? I'd have to look it up. It was like in the very early 1700s or the late 1600s. Yeah, so Daniel Defoe died in 1731. So what's interesting is Daniel Defoe is essentially a journalist, just like George Orwell or Eric Blair and Charles Dickens. And you could say Mark Twain to a certain extent, but I don't think Mark Twain really was a journalist ever. He was more of a storyteller. In any case, Defoe was really essentially a journalist. This is not a knock on his writing abilities as a novelist, any more than it is on Dickens or Orwell. What it means is he's very observant and can really get into detail to help tell the story. So I found it very interesting, but what was disappointing to me was that this is actually not a complete book, as it were. There is a sequel, and what's interesting is Defoe had to write this because this was such a popular book that other people were coming up with their own unauthorized sequels to the book. Now, part of this, of course, is that Defoe based this on, I believe the guy was named Alexander Selkirk, of someone who had similarly been cast away and didn't show up for decades later. I'd have to look up the details, but that person wrote his own memoir. That was popular, and my understanding is Defoe really needed to make a bunch of money because he had business deals that had fallen through, and he needed to eat. So this is one of the things that he wrote. Another one that I want to read, I haven't read yet, is Journal of a Plague Year, and that's actually from his childhood. I think he was alive when the plague hit in around 1666 in London. But he was a little kid at the time. But he used various accounts and really made it come alive. And that's my understanding. But I haven't read it yet, so I'll let you know when I do. Okay, this one is cool. The Big Con, the story of the Confidence Man. This is an old book, as in it's from, the 40s or 50s, and it was written by a linguist who was studying the lingo of the old time con men. And there is a glossary in the back of the book. You kind of need it. He does explain the various terms in the book itself as well, but I did often find myself paging to the back to look at it and then go to the front. I read this in an ebook version, so that I could easily go through the, so I could cross-reference. So this covered the con games and lingo of con men, primarily in the U.S. from 1900 to 1940. And this is the old-time scams. This specific world was killed by a number of things. So part of this was a move away from trains as the big long-distance transport. So it used to be trains, so you could get your mark on the train or at train stations. But when it moved to planes and cars and the interstate system, that wasn't so great. Not to mention federal prosecution of these cons. The way a lot of these con men got away with it is because the fix was in with the local law enforcement. They bribed the cops, the prosecutors, etc. You could get away with that on a municipal level. The kind of money to do it at the federal level was probably beyond their ability. The problem is these cons get really repetitive after a time, and you feel like it's a bunch of laundry lists past a certain point. The Kindle version, the ebook version I was reading was not hyperlinked. And this is something I've worked on an ebook where I had come up with, and it wasn't just me, I worked with other people, but I was making sure with the editorial team that we hyperlinked glossary terms and biographical notes of people, people didn't know as well, so that you can just click on it and it'll take you to there in our own text, rather than using the Kindle feature where you highlight it and then it'll give you the result from a Google search, dictionary, or Wikipedia. And if you have like a very specific meaning in mind, and so that would be like this specialized lingo, you really need to have it hyperlinked. So that was my only complaint in terms of how the book was produced. So the next two are kind of interesting. Jane and the Madness of Lord Byron, Stephanie Barron, and I believe it's a pen name, and I don't remember what her real name is. It doesn't matter. Stephanie Barron is the name used by an author who has written a series of basically Jane Austen as a murder detective. And it's based off of real events, not the murders, but real events in Jane Austen's life, places she visited, people she knew. Now, I don't think Jane Austen ever ran into Lord Byron. Actually, I'm not even sure she went to Brighton. But the people involved here, you had some real historical figures in this novel. There's someone who's murdered. That's a made-up person. But there's other people in the book that historically did exist, and some of the shenanigans that are in the book really did happen. The fun part of this whole series, so you see this is Jane Austen Mysteries number 10. The fun part of a lot of these is learning a lot of the society of Jane Austen. The author, Stephanie Barron, researched a lot of this very well in terms of how different things like court procedures or the coroner's court and that inquiries and that kind of thing. And she likes to touch on different aspects of the Regency society. So Regency, people keep talking about Regency. This has to do with the Prince George, who became George IV, was Prince Regent for a lot of his father's reign, that's King George III, because as George III got older, he had bouts of, they just called it insanity, where he really couldn't rule as king. And at the time, the kings were not merely figureheads. Now, Parliament was gaining in power at this time, but through Victoria, they still had a lot of political influence. So the Prince Regent figures in this particular novel, Jane and the Madness of Lord Byron. He also does pop up kind of as a side character in a different, I think that's the Waterloo Map one, because there is one of Jane Austen's books that's dedicated to the Prince Regent because he enjoyed, and I can't remember if it was Emma or Emma was the one that was like he liked Emma and she dedicated Mansfield Park to him. It doesn't really matter. The thing is, Jane Austen really didn't like him. And a lot of people of the time didn't like the Prince Regent. He was a dandy. As he was getting older, he was fat and ridiculous. He had an expensive lifestyle and did not necessarily contribute to the country. So a great a great thing if you want to know a little bit about the ridiculousness of George IV is to watch the Blackadder series. It's Blackadder the Third series. Is set in the Regency period when the Prince Regent is still relatively young. Well, it's because it's Hugh Laurie is playing George IV, and so Laurie has not ever been fat, as far as I know, but he has definitely knows how to play the inane, foppish, upper class twit. He does it very well, and it's very funny. So maybe Jane and the Madness of Lord Byron's not to your taste, but Blackadder maybe. And then this last one, oh my god, I should not have read this. This is not what I expected. A Lady's First Scandal, The Mayflowers #1, though it looks like it's probably off of another series. It's a, quote, romance novel, but it's erotica. It's supposedly set in Victorian England, and you've got the suffragettes or weird proto-feminists, and it's hard to tell what time period, but there are so many anachronisms in this, to put it mildly. The sex scenes, oh my gosh, I was just crying from the laughter. I actually powered through because it's not that long of a book. It is not what I expected. One of my friends had read it and she liked it. And I'm like, oh, okay. I hadn't read romance novel in a long time. And I'm not counting Jane Austen and that kind of thing as a romance novel. And I forgot. I'm just like, oh, yeah, this is why I don't read romance novels. It's ridiculous. It is so anachronistic in terms of the politics, the social mores, and the social attitudes. It's stupid. But you can see the people who read this, who like this kind of thing. So if this is the kind of genre you like, then you'll like the book. There is lots of sex in the book. Oh my God. And it's explicit, by the way. And again, this is what made me laugh so hard. I forgot how much this stuff makes me laugh. Anyway, just something for y'all to know. Bye.